When I say the words indie horror game, you probably think of something like Bendy and the Ink Machine, Doki Doki Literature Club, Iron Lung, Choo Choo Charles, Phasmophobia, Demonologist, etc., etc. But one franchise remains king. King of kings, even. The progenitor of the popularity of mascot horror, Five Nights at Freddy's exploded into one of the biggest indie franchises on Earth. At this point, there are over 14 games counting spin-offs, and the series has activity books, coloring books, comic books, even regular books, 1,000,001 fan animations and let's plays, map pads, unbridled attention, and now, a movie. Consider this video an addendum to my video game movie video. If you enjoy the format, you can get a whole heck of a lot more of it there, and you should consider subscribing. Wink wink nudge nudge, I have a big project in the works. Also, if it isn't obvious, this video is going to contain spoilers for the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, so tread carefully lest you encounter unwanted information. It was inevitable that Five Nights at Freddy's would get a movie. It's the kind of franchise that people don't just want more of, they want a lot more of it, due to hidden lore and stories that bring more questions than they do answers. It should be no shock to anyone that it took less than a year from the first game's release in 2014 for a movie to be put in development. In April of 2015, it was announced that Warner Bros. Had acquired the film rights to Five Nights at Freddy's, and they were working closely with series creator Scott Cawthon in order to make the movie as complete as it could be.
The story really lends itself to being a movie, and it taps into a large reality which a horror that a lot of people will be able to relate to.
Alongside Scott, to develop the movie, Warner Bros. Enlisted 3 producers. Roy Lee, who had previously produced the 2008 movie Shudder, the 2014 Godzilla reboot, and the 2015 Poltergeist remake. Seth Grahame-Smith, who wrote and produced Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. And David Katzenberg, who alongside Grahame-Smith was producing the It reboot and the still yet to be released Beetlejuice sequel. I gotta take this jacket off, oh my god, it's so warm. By late July of that year, Warner Bros. Signed Gil Kenan, best known for directing Monster House, to direct the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. From there, Five Nights at Freddy's was stuck in development hell. In a 2020 Reddit post, Scott Cawthon revealed information about previous drafts of the script. Presumably, some of these come from this period of development hell at Warner Bros., and I've done my best to piece together which probably came from that era. And that's assuming these are all real ideas and not just jokes he came up with for a Reddit post. Scott Cawthon called the first draft the F screenplay. Described as group of teenage troublemakers break into Freddy's, chaos ensues, there's a semicolon in there. The synopsis would likely lead to something like Willy's Wonderland, a movie that's clearly FNAF inspired. Cawthon rejected this script because it's strayed too far from the games, kinda like the Doom movies compared to the Doom games. Next up is The Plushies Take Manhattan screenplay. Described as The Plushies Take Manhattan, the reason for rejecting it was, quote, The Plushies Took Manhattan. I'm like 80% certain that one's a joke, but I've seen too much behind-the-scenes material for video game movies to rule out the possibility that someone pitched that in good faith. The last version of the script that I'm going to haphazardly guess as part of this era of development is the Random Charlie screenplay. Cawthon described this version of the screenplay as being loosely based on the games and books, only really borrowing names from characters and being a mixed bag of FNAF lore with no real stakes. These potential versions of a Five Nights at Freddy's movie were kind of the standard for what a video game movie was in 2014 to 2016. Movies like Assassin's Creed, Hitman Agent 47, and Warcraft strayed from their video game roots because they were ashamed of them, so it's only natural that an even less established IP like Five Nights at Freddy's was at the time would be pushed further away from its source material. At the end of January of 2017, Scott Cawthon revealed in a newsletter for Five Nights at Freddy's sister location that the movie was basically back to square one. Due to the haphazard development, Five Nights at Freddy's was tossed from Warner Bros. Lineup like a piece of stale bread being thrown through the air and straight into the mouth of a hungry duck. And that duck's name was Jason Blum. In March of 2017, Scott Cawthon tweeted a photo of the Blumhouse logo with a chair in front of it simply labeled Freddy. By May of that same year, Blumhouse confirmed that they had acquired the film rights from Warner Bros. And were developing a Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Given the transition to Blumhouse, it was presumed that nobody from the Warner Bros. Version of the movie was still actively developing the project, save for Scott Cawthon himself, which was eventually confirmed by Gil Kenan on Twitter when he revealed he was no longer directing the movie. In February of 2018, Blumhouse revealed that Chris Columbus would be directing their version of the FNAF movie. You may know Chris Columbus's previous work, including Mrs. Doubtfire, Home Alone, and the first 2 Harry Potter movies. He was a fairly substantial grab for the production. By August of 2018, Scott Cawthon revealed in an Ultimate Custom Night Steam forum post that he had been working with Kira Breed-Risley, the co-author of the Five Nights at Freddy's Silver Eyes trilogy of books, and that the two had finished a draft of the screenplay that would be thrown out by November. Blumhouse had announced that they were going for a 2020 release, and both Chris Columbus and Jason Blum enjoyed the script, but Scott Cawthon decided to move on, citing that he had a better idea. Going back to that Reddit post, this is presumably the Misfit Kid version of the screenplay. Cawthon himself said it was going to be the screenplay, but that it was his decision to move on from it because he didn't like the characters and setup. The basic premise is simple. A new kid moves to town, meets Freddy Fazbear, hijinks ensue. In Scott Cawthon's defense, it was probably a good idea to move on from that version of the script. To me, it sounds too much like an 80s mascot movie, like Mac and Me or Short Circuit. The Five Nights at Freddy's movie continued development for about 2 years when we finally got some news on it. And that news was that Chris Columbus left the project. But on the bright side, it was still happening, and Scott Cawthon finalized the final version of the screenplay for real, finally, and forever, with plans to start filming the following spring. Then the following spring came around, and shooting was delayed due to script issues.
We've written multiple scripts, and we've got where we're threading a needle, which is doing justice to Five Nights at Freddy's and making Scott happy. The only way we would go about it is giving Scott... I don't want to do something that Scott doesn't like. Let me say that a different way. I don't have the right to do anything Scott doesn't like. Basically, Scott is kind of the equivalent of Final Cut, and it's taken longer than I hoped to get the right story.
On August 9th, 2022, Jason Blum revealed on his Twitter account that the Jim Henson Creature Shop would be doing the puppets and animatronics for Five Nights at Freddy's. You may know Jim Henson's Creature Shop from movies like the Ninja Turtles and their reputation as one of the best animatronics and puppet companies in the entirety of Hollywood. Or, you know, the Muppets. Just a few months later, in October of 2022, it was announced that Emma Tammy would be taking over as director, as well as receiving a writing credit in addition to Scott Cawthon and Seth Kudabak. Tammy is by no means a rookie, but is also a far less established director than Columbus was. In December of 2022, Josh Hutcherson and Matthew Lillard were announced to have joined the cast of Five Nights at Freddy's in undisclosed roles. Those roles were later revealed to be Five Nights at Freddy's 1 protagonist Mike Schmidt and William Afton, respectively. Revealed by the YouTuber Daco. Finally, February 1st, 2023, filming begins under the working title Bad Cupcake, presumably a reference to Chica's Cupcake. The first look at said cupcake, as well as the main cast of animatronics, was given to us in the first teaser trailer for the film. And honestly, the animatronics in the movie look more like Five Nights at Freddy's 1 than Five Nights at Freddy's 1 does. It's kind of eerie. I'm trying to get this video out within a few days of Five Nights at Freddy's release. I wrote this history segment before the film was even out, so there's not a lot of stories that I can find about actual on-set shenanigans. But one story did make headlines when director Emma Tammy revealed that they once overworked the Foxy animatronics so much that it caught fire. I'm going to start off talking about my opinions on the movie itself with what I really liked about it, which I find is a way to diffuse people's negativity and show that I'm only about 85% a jerk. 1. The animatronics look really nice. The way they move is kind of stiff, but in a way that feels intentional, especially given that they're a pastiche of, 80s animatronics. What's really important about them is the facial movements. Obviously, the jaws really can't move too much other than open and close, so the eyes have to do a lot of heavy lifting. And heavy lifting they did. The eyebrow movement, eyelids, and even the color that the eyes glow really convey the shifts in the animatronics' moods. As expected from the wonderful creatives at the Jim Henson Creature Shop. If I ever have my own $25 million movie, I'm hiring them. 2. Everyone gives decent enough performances, except for Vanessa, but that's more of a writing problem in my opinion. I wasn't expecting bad performances from Josh Hutcherson or Matthew Lillard, but there are a lot of child actors in this movie, and child actors rarely win Oscars. I was pleasantly surprised by the lack of mediocrity coming from the children. I mean, they're not going to change the Oscar statistic anytime soon, but they weren't bad, and that's what's important. 3. I'll be honest, I sat at my keyboard for a good 5 minutes trying to think of something. There's so much about the Five Nights at Freddy's movie that should have worked and that I really wanted to be good, but I just can't speak too positively about it. But before I get into my full list of complaints, I'm gonna ramble off some observations from my notes. MatPat jump scare! He drops the "it's just a theory" line, and I died a little inside. I can't figure out who Markiplier was going to be before they had to cancel his cameo due to scheduling conflicts with Iron Lung. I bet it was going to be the taxi driver.
Was that the bite of 87?
I like the dog animatronic husk. It fits with the style of the other animatronics, and it doesn't look out of place. Unlike the, what I can only presume is supposed to be Circus Baby? The first on-screen kill in the Five Nights at Freddy's cinematic universe belongs to Chica's Cupcake. The cupcake is shown to be independent to Chica. Does the cupcake also have a body stuffed inside of it? There are 5 kid ghosts, and 4 animatronics if you don't count the cupcake. I can't get over the logistics of the cupcake being sentient. The moment it clicked in my head that this movie takes place sometime around 2003 was this CRT television. When I wrote down CRT, I also wrote down, quote, rock and roll torture, because my mind immediately popped to Scooby-Doo. And then I also wrote down the words, I wish I was watching Scooby-Doo right now. Presumably, the cab is waiting outside of Abby and Mike's house to pick up a solo child. Otherwise, that driver is way too chill about a kid getting in his taxi. Freddy didn't take the taxi to Abby and Mike's house. Otherwise, the taxi driver wouldn't have been surprised by him. That means the ghost dialed the phone with his big old Freddy hands, called the taxi company, and somehow relayed to them that a child was in need of transport in the middle of the night. And then the taxi company said, okay, and sent someone over. I can practically smell the filth in that 20-year-old ball pit. Man, the trailers made this look like a different movie. I want to take a step back from what I'm about to say and preface it. It is okay if you enjoyed the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. I did not. I have some big reasons and a bunch of small reasons that I didn't. But if you disagree with me, you are welcome to leave a respectful comment down below. The biggest complaint I have about the Five Nights at Freddy's movie is that it feels like the second movie in a trilogy. It just can't decide if it wants to be for the fans or for newcomers to the franchise, and it ends up with a middle-of-the-road take that will satisfy neither. Like, it expects you to know certain things while also treating knowledge on the same level of lore deepness as big reveals when they show it to you in the movie. I know that comparison is a cheap tactic to make weak reviews stronger, but let's go ahead and take a look at the other big video game movie with Universal's name attached to it that came out in 2023. That's right, it's the Super Mario Bros. Movie. You don't need to know a single thing about Mario to watch the Super Mario Bros. Movie, but varying levels of knowledge of the franchise will enhance your viewing of the movie. Did you know that the notes that Kamek plays in this scene where he's jamming on the piano with Bowser is a reference to a video so old it went viral before YouTube existed? That's older than some of the people who are going to click on this video and yell at me. To contrast, the more you understand Five Nights at Freddy's lore, the more you'll be frustrated with how the movie treats concept from the games. This is my dark moment of shame, where I reveal that my guilty pleasure is watching MatPat FNAF lore videos. I know there's like a dozen guys named Mike, and half of them are the same person, and also one of them got scooped, and also maybe that's also the same person, and some of them aren't named Mike. They use the name Mike a lot. So when they play coy with Mike's last name, it kind of feels like they're building up to some sort of big reveal, even though it's obvious he's Mike Schmidt, and then he just casually says Mike Schmidt after only saying Mike so many times. When they introduce a blonde lady, it's clearly going to be Vanessa, but this movie is based around the concept of Five Nights at Freddy's 1, so her role in the story isn't clear, and that can lead to a lot of intrigue. And then it's clear that she's nothing like her game counterpart, and her only purpose in the movie is to exposit or be exposited to. Also, the central mystery of who kidnapped Mike's younger brother is technically solved. Speaking of William Afton, where the fuck was he? He's using the fake name Steve Raglan in a career as a guidance counselor where he's clearly hiding something and knows who Mike Schmidt is, and then he just doesn't fucking show up for the rest of the movie until the very end when they realized they needed a shot of the Springlock suit to put in the trailer. Did they only have enough budget for 5 minutes of Matthew Lillard? No offense to Matthew Lillard, but it can't be that expensive to put him on screen when he's already signed on to the fucking movie. And the scene where his Springlock suit acts up and traps him in it is clearly a setup for a movie based around Five Nights at Freddy's 3, especially given that it's a direct recreation of the scene that shows how he wound up in the position that he was in when he's about to be put on display in Fazbear's Fright in Five Nights at Freddy's 3. But it just doesn't have any of the build-up, or lore, or anything to justify it being in the first Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Speaking of smooth transitions, the choice to make Five Nights at Freddy's PG-13 makes sense considering that it has a younger skewing audience, and it's not like the series itself has ever been heavy on blood and viscera. I'll also defend it by saying you can make very competent horror using PG-13 rating. Just look at Insidious, A Quiet Place, Troll 2, all great movies in their own way. But Five Nights at Freddy's doesn't know how to properly utilize those boundaries as a strength. Instead, it shows us a shadow of a woman getting chopped in half after probably the only scary part of the movie. You see, Five Nights at Freddy's isn't scary because of the jump scares that pop on your screen, it's scary because of the jump scare you're waiting to pop up on your screen. The quintessential feeling of dread, that at a moment's notice anything could go wrong, is completely and utterly missing from the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. There's just too much. Kid meets Freddy, hijinks ensue, energy left over from previous drafts of the script. While Mike, Abby, the animatronics, and Vanessa were busy building a table fort and daydreaming in the middle of the night, I found myself repeatedly checking the runtime left on the movie and asking myself, how are they going to fit everything from the trailer in the back half of the movie? In the last 40 minutes of the movie? In the last 30 minutes of the movie? In the last 20 minutes of the movie? And then they do it all in the last 15. And it feels like most of it happened in the last 5. Mike has trauma because his brother was kidnapped as a kid. Okay, that's a decent setup. It gets him fired from his old job as a security guard, and he has security experience, so he's obviously going to get a job at Five Nights at Freddy's. I meant to say Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. Fuck it, I'm keeping that take. And he needs that new job to keep custody of his sister, so he can't just leave it. Okay, good setup. It's a pretty clear personal conflict, but it's not clear how that's going to tie into Freddy's itself beyond the job. Oh, his sister can coincidentally see these specific 5 children's ghosts, and has been able to see them for a while. Long enough that her school is taking note of her inability to properly socialize with children her age. Don't worry, folks, your kid's not neurodivergent, it's just ghosts. Oh, cool, they introduced a cop who has personal history as a kid with Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. I sure hope her scenes aren't all just exposition dumps. At the very least, I am sure that the brutality being shown towards the security guard at the very beginning of the movie and the thugs who break in to frame Mike will pay off at some point and isn't just for shock. To top it all off, everything looks kinda cheap. Obviously, the animatronics are amazing. They clearly blew the entire budget on that. But the way everything is framed, lit, and just generally how everything feels is cheap. It carries the energy of, we got too much money from crowdfunding and we don't know what to do with it, like that racist Spider-Man film. Five Nights at Freddy's was produced on an estimated budget of $25 million, or roughly 1/8 of Secret Invasion. That is relatively cheap in Hollywood's modern era of overinflated budgets, and presumably a lot of that money went into the fact that most everything is actually physically there on set, but there's no way that the sets and animatronics cost so much that they couldn't afford to hire a cinematographer with some guts. For another comparison, let's look towards a previous draft of Five Nights at Freddy's that someone broke into Scott Cawthon's house, stole, and turned into an actual movie starring Nicolas Cage. Willy's Wonderland was produced on an estimated budget of around $5 million, and a decent amount of that was probably handed over to its star. The actual plot substance of Willy's Wonderland is debatable, depending on whether you think it's trying to be funny on purpose or not, and the animatronics aren't anywhere near as impressive as the Five Nights at Freddy's animatronics. But there are so many more fun and creative shots in Willy's Wonderland than there are in Five Nights at Freddy's. Moments of great editing, intercutting tense situations with Nicolas Cage playing pinball, striking and dramatic use of lighting and framing, bold camera placement that enhances the goriness of the story rather than trying to hide it. The only shot in the entirety of Five Nights at Freddy's that looked like it had half as much creativity put into it as Willy's Wonderland did was this shot where the ghost kid turns into Foxy. Everything just comes together in the worst possible way. This isn't Five Nights at Freddy's, the game franchise with lots of hidden lore and stories yet to be uncovered that people love to poke at and speculate about. This isn't Five Nights at Freddy's, the book series that slowly reveals crucial bits of information and allows fans to speculate how it impacts the franchise as a whole. This is Five Nights at Freddy's, the movie that plays the living tombstone in its credits and tells you everything you need to know instead of showing any of it. Five Nights at Freddy's is less the culmination of the creative spirit of a beloved franchise, and more the culmination of Jason Blum's money hunger and Scott Cawthon's inability to tell a proper story without fans there to fill in the gaps. Scott Cawthon, Jason Blum, I know you're both watching this video sitting together 5 feet apart in a hot tub with your shirts on, smoking cigars and drinking champagne from the same glass, so I'm going to pitch you a prequel to Five Nights at Freddy's. Matthew Lillard plays the character of William Afton, and he's on screen for more than 5 minutes. He's a villainous man who's beset by a desire to murder all of the killer in Fritz Lang's M, which would be a major influence. He goes into business with a brilliant engineer. Our protagonist, Henry, I can't remember his last name from the books. Henry has his suspicions of Afton, but Afton and Afton's creativity is just as important to Freddy Fazbear's as the actual metal and circuitry, so he pushes his concerns to the side. From here we follow Henry as he races to solve the mystery and salvage Freddy's reputation before meeting his demise at Afton's hand upon figuring it all out. Final shot of the movie is Freddy's being closed up for good. But hey, that's just a pitch. A film pitch. Thanks for watching.